tuned into WestLINK.
Welcome to WestLINK, where we connect and talk about relevant topics. We appreciate you joining us this afternoon, and I would like to invite you to please like, comment, and subscribe to our Toronto West channel. I'm your host today. My name is Greg Burkett. I am a husband, a father, a high school teacher, a servant of God, and a friend to humankind, a tax-paying and tithe-paying citizen. Yes, I give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's, because that's just the kind of man I am. So today's program, I'm really excited. I'm blessed to be back. It's been a minute since I've been with you on WestLINK. So it's really good to be here. The last time I was here with a bunch of jokers, literally, because the topic was humor in church. And then, of course, last week's episode of WestLINK was about Caribbean, African, and Bible proverbs, and there was an element of humor there as well. It was a really good program. Today, we're going to pivot a little bit, and we're going to take a bit more of an academic approach, but it's still going to be very engaging, so don't dare go anywhere. So I want to jump into things here and say that last year, shortly after the murder of George Floyd, I was approached by a group of young youth leaders, representing the West Region Adventist Department of the Greater Toronto Area, to do a presentation for them. And they were pretty distraught, and they wanted to discuss two things. They had two things on their mind. First, they wanted to speak a little about why there was so little Black representation, or rather, why we seldom talk about the Black representation in the Bible. And then the second thing they wanted to talk about was why does our church on a national and international level seem so slow to respond to pressing social justice issues? There are many social justice movements and organizations out there that actually are sort of espousing to the ideology that you can't be legitimately a part of the movement or down for the cause if you're Christian, because Christianity is deemed the white man's religion or the white man's church. And of course, we know that this is totally untrue. We know that the worship of Christ was and Sabbath keeping existed on the continent of Africa prior to the arrival of European missionaries. But this is the philosophy that's being espoused. So our young people really wanted some assurance, and they wanted some confidence, and they wanted to be reassured that they belong to a denomination that cares about who they are and about the issues that concern them. And to be frank, the church's slow response and quiet response to the growing unrest regarding racism really didn't help much at all. So today we're going to take a look back at how Seventh-day Adventist pioneers viewed and dealt with social justice issues during their time period, or the social justice issues of their day, particularly where race or racism is concerned. There's a bit of a movement or a growing notion that we need to move away from focusing on history and concentrate on the future. I think, however, that they go hand in hand. History reveals the past, it explains the present, and it informs the future. The Bible is a history book, and studying the Bible helps us to know where we've been and where we're going. So with that being said, I want to welcome two amazing Adventist historians that we have joining us today. First, I'd like to invite Kevin Burton to join us. Kevin, good to have you here, sir.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I teach at Southern Adventist University, and I am in the History and Political Studies department. And my research focuses on Adventist, Millerites, and Seventh-day Adventist involvement in the abolition movement. And so that's what I'm doing right now for my doctoral dissertation. Now, on a personal level, I have a wife named Sarah, and I've got two kids as well. Adelia is 3. She's going to be 4 this summer, and then John is going to be 1 in about a month.
Okay. All right, and you look like you're getting sleep. That's interesting, man. Having two kids under 4, and you look so well.
Yeah, right. Let me tell you about the last week, right? Actually, last night was pretty good.
Okay.
Last night was pretty good, but the last week, they're both sick right now. So the last week, it's been
tough.
bad.
Yeah, for sure.
It's been bad.
Okay. And sorry, before I bring out the next historian, I just want you to I want you to break down rather just what abolition means for some of our viewers who may not be familiar with the term. What is abolition?
And a quick answer to that question, in America in the 19th century, before the Civil War, the American Civil War, which was fought over slavery, it literally means, or the simplest definition is that you are advocating for the immediate and total abolition of slavery. Number one, first and foremost, it's about that. Number two, there is an ideal that everyone is striving for equal rights for Blacks. They don't emphasize that as much, although it is still central to the abolition movement. And not all abolitionists, of course, across the spectrum live up to it as well as others do. But nevertheless, they are the progressives of the era, and they are beloved and loved by people of color, even when they do fall short. And so, even though there are arguments back and forth, mostly for the most part, they're on point. They're in the right direction. So, yeah, historians have looked very kindly on them as a result of that. So they are the first. This is the first era of the civil rights movement.
Okay,
wave of it, you could call it that.
Perfect. Thank you for breaking that down for us. I would like to invite now Jeffrey Rosario. Jeffrey, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for having me on. This is exciting. I never get bored talking about this topic, so I'm excited about it.
Awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, sir?
Sure. I'm currently a PhD candidate at the University of Cambridge. I'm in my 3rd year, and I'm in the middle of writing my dissertation. And my research focuses on the Adventist apocalyptic worldview, specifically the social and political implications of that worldview. How did this movement that's so fixated on the prophetic message, how did their reading of the Bible impact the way they related to the issues around them in their day? And so that's the central focus of my research. I've been married for 12 years. I'm currently reside in Miami, Florida, which is my hometown. My family's from the Dominican Republic in the Caribbean, and my wife is a doctoral student here at the University of Miami, where she's studying nurse and anesthesia.
Nice. All right. Thank you. And I got to say, I told them last night, but I am a huge fan of both of these gentlemen. I've seen them on a few different programs with Ivor Myers and with Benjamin Baker. And, I'm excited that they're here. It's a little bit surreal that I'm actually speaking to them. But,
I apologize in advance for the disappointment and the letdown you're about to get.
Second on that, yeah.
Well, I'm hoping that I'm not overselling and that you won't underperform, but I think we're gonna have an amazing time here. So let's dive right in. First of all, I want to ask, how did the early Adventist church view its role in the social justice issues of their day? And with that, I want you to sort of touch on the popular ideologies concerning race at that time, and where Adventist pioneers stood concerning these ideologies, and how that informed sort of their social justice activity. So I'm gonna go to Kevin first.
All right, sure. So it was central. This idea of social justice. I mean, they're not using that term, but the concept of justice for society, justice in society, and specifically on the topic of race, that was central to Seventh-day Adventism when we began. In fact, abolitionism was so central to our beginnings that really we would not have existed without the abolition movement. Our message of the Second Advent is spreading through abolitionist networks and circles. At least the majority as far as I can tell, the majority of Millerites and then later Seventh-day Adventists, they are abolitionists. that doesn't mean they're all as active as they're not all Frederick Douglass. None of them are Frederick Douglass, in fact, because he wasn't an Adventist. But a lot of them
But
knew.
his daughter, remember his daughter?
His daughter
Yes,
becomes a Seventh-day Adventist. Yes, that's right, Rosetta Douglass Sprague. And he was working very closely with others. So William J. Watkins Jr. is one of the assistant editors of Frederick Douglass's paper. He's a first-day Adventist. So he had been a Millerite with all his family and so forth. And so, yeah, we're digressing, but the point is it was central, okay?
Kevin, I wanted to add real quick to that.
Do it. Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to add real quick to that, and maybe we can zoom out a bit, because the viewpoint of the early Adventist community by viewing out, I mean like zooming out, racial injustice rather than just abolition, because we're talking about, this is a huge theme and topic. So I like to pitch it in within the context of human rights, really. And one of the things that every week I'm blown away at the degree of engagement of the first and second generation of Seventh-day Adventists, their engagement with the central social justice issues of the time, which oftentimes was wrapped in racial injustice. But they didn't engage in order to align with or to serve some political party, which I think is a major and important point. They did it on the terms of their worldview, right? Of what comes to the surface as important to the apocalyptic worldview. One thing that I'm struck by reading the literature, reading hundreds of periodicals and correspondence and books and pamphlets in the period, in first, second generation Adventism, so from the 1850s all the way to the 1890s, is that they did not compartmentalize social political issues in this box and then religious issues or theological issues in this box. And that's the thing that I'm repeatedly challenged by. It's all in the same box, right? Okay. It's in the same box. The box where you put your religious conviction, your theological perspective, your Adventist worldview, is the same box that contains the social issues around you. And I think that's the central challenge that we get from the first generation, from the early Adventists. And there's this letter from Ellen White, 1894, and she says that false Christianity is careless for human needs, human suffering, and human rights. This is 1894, right? We're still in the early stage of the church developing, right?
Yes.
In the latter end of the 1800s, and I think that's very powerful. And Kevin is going to hit on this for sure later. I will make him if he doesn't. And that is the way the church developed its apocalyptic worldview. I'm going to talk about that for a second, if you don't mind, Greg, because I think this is critical too. It's just like a frame.
Yes.
And everything in the picture fits in this frame. The concept of revelation, this apocalyptic worldview, has everything to do with the relationship to power, right? Mm-hmm. It's about empire. These are the rise and fall of these different empires and how the church fits in. All through the Bible, there's a spotlight, right? Yeah. And every secular empire that we read about in Scripture, the reason we read about them is because they've come in contact with the church in the Old Testament or the church in the New Testament. Okay. But to the point of Revelation 13, I know I'm speaking from an American standpoint, but our Canadian neighbors could for sure, appreciate this. Revelation 13, America in prophecy. There's this horn, this beast, but it has two horns, right? It speaks like a lamb. It actually behaves and it looks like a lamb rather, and it speaks and behaves like a dragon. But the two horns of this beast, the church early on established that these two horns represent religious and civil liberty. So already we have a situation where you cannot separate Adventist theology from justice, because the whole thing is premised on civil and religious liberty. Now, we're really big in our generation, and since like the 1940s, 50s, 60s, into today, we're really big on harping and worrying about that one horn that deals with religious liberty,
Okay. Yes.
But we've lost the plot when it comes to the other horn. There's two horns on this piece. The other horn is civil freedom.
Yeah.
And that brings us into the realm of what's happening in the social issues of our day, right? It's not just spirit. By the way, Revelation 13 up front says this is going to be an issue that's related to buy and sell, right? It says they will not be allowed to buy and sell. Okay, now we're taken away from an exclusively spiritual, hyper spiritual context to now a situation where we're talking about socioeconomic issues now, right? We're entering into the realm. Okay, one last thing I'll say, and then I'll shut up at this point. I'm just really passionate about this. The early Adventists, and Kevin to me is like the guru when it comes to this early Adventist stage of developing the prophetic worldview. The early Adventists, I self-identified as a prophetic movement. Obviously, we know that. I have this buddy, Jasper, saying, Jasper is a PhD at University of Tennessee, I think, in philosophy. He told me this once. He said, Jeffrey, you line up 100 Adventists, and you ask them, what is prophecy? What is prophetic? What is a prophet? He said, all 100 will most likely say that prophecy is a timeline of events. Prophecy is foretelling the future.
Right.
There's actually a gross misunderstanding of what prophecy is, right? Prophecy is not a timeline of events or a fixation of predicting future events. That's a very small part of what prophecy is. You have your key time prophecy passages in scripture, but most of the prophets in the Bible spoke to the present primarily. They spoke to the present primarily. And I think
protest.
Yeah. It's about protest. I believe through the course of this conversation, I hope the early generations of Adventists, they basically put that on display. Yes, it's a prophetic movement. Yes, it's a movement centrally focused on the second coming of Jesus, which is a future event. Yes, future. Yet, I think that what my study of Adventist history leaves me with is a profound appreciation for the present tense of what all of that stuff even means.
Yeah. And they tie that in with prepping, right? And we think of preppers as like crazy people going out in the wilderness, storing up food.
What do you mean by prepping? Explain what you mean by prepping.
Yeah, I'm gonna get to that. Digging a hole in the ground and building a house so that you can survive the apocalypse. Yeah, preppers are people who are preparing for the apocalypse. Well, Adventists are preppers too, and the Millerites especially were preppers. But what were they doing? They weren't doing, they weren't going off out in the wilderness and like digging holes in the ground. The point is they used social justice for them was what you did to prepare. That was what you did to prepare. In other words, you had to show your anti-slavery views through your actions and your temperance views and your views against all sorts of other radical reforms of the era. I've got several statements from people that are talking about how this is the preparation work. In other words, one Millerite calls them the actual pioneers of the Advent, the reforms themselves. He calls them the pioneers. In other words, this is what we do to prepare our hearts and minds for the apocalypse. So that draws past and like future and present together. Yeah, you focus on the future, but in order to get to that future that you want, you've got to be on the right side.
So
right?
basically they were saying that, because I heard somewhere that they actually believed that if you were a slaveholder, if you were in favor of slavery, that was your connection to. I mean, when
you're gonna be damned. You're damned.
Sorry? Yeah. Okay.
If you're owning slaves, especially, but also if you're pro-slavery, oh man, you got a fast ticket to hell.
Right.
Right there. No questions asked.
Okay.
And most of the Millerites believed in ever burning hell. Okay. Seventh-day Adventists and a few Millerites were going to, following George Storrs, we're going to reject that. But nevertheless, it's a fast ticket to eternal destruction.
Okay.
So doesn't matter either way. Yeah. You are not in, and that's the first angel's message, by the way.
Okay. And now, so we're gonna go to a video. We're gonna transition to a video here that's gonna add a little more context to what we're saying. And then when we come back, we're gonna get into a little more of a focused dialogue about the relationship between Adventists and abolition when we come back after this video.
early Adventist pioneers had a radical new theology, but it wasn't just limited to the four walls of a church. They were at the forefront of many of the new social movements, such as the temperance movement, as well as the abolition of slavery. Slavery had been practiced in America since its earliest days and was considered normal in some parts of the country, but not for the early founders of Adventism. William Miller, Joseph Bates, and Joshua V. Himes all spoke actively and openly against this evil institution. In the mid-1800s, slavery was widely practiced in the southern states, but not up north, and many slaves attempted to and succeeded in escaping to freedom via the Underground Railroad. It was neither underground nor a railroad, but a network of homes, farms, and transportation that would get someone secretly from the south up to the northern states or to Canada. Perhaps the most famous name associated with this movement of liberation is Harriet Tubman, who helped thousands of people to escape. Also, Sojourner Truth spoke widely and passionately against slavery, and she was baptized as an Adventist by Uriah Smith. John Byington, the first General Conference president, used his farm in upstate New York as a stop on the Underground Railroad as well. Early Adventists were encouraged to help out in this, defying the law of the land. In 1850, the Fugitive Slave Law was passed by Congress to strengthen the earlier but often neglected law of 1793. It required any citizen to return an escaped slave to his master with fines and punishments in case of violation. Ellen White, commenting on the relationship that Adventists should have to this law, said, "The law of our land requiring us to deliver an escaped slave to his master, we are not to obey, and we must abide the consequences of violating this law." J. N. Loughborough, J. N. Andrews, Uriah Smith, Joseph Bates, and James White all wrote and held positions against slavery. The church was advocating a revolutionary new approach and endeavoring to adhere to biblical principles over culture and the norms of society. Ellen White also advocated that those who held pro-slavery views should be disfellowshipped from church. As soon as slavery was abolished, the Adventist Church made inroads into the southern states, and Edson White's Morning Star boat pioneered the work in many new areas. Schools, churches, printing presses, sanitariums, and food companies were opened. As the work progressed, the need arose for a school to train workers, and on November the 16th, 1896, Oakwood Industrial School was opened. Oakwood would go on to be a flagship school amongst the African American community here in North America, and for over 120 years now, they have educated thousands of students.
All right. So in that video, there are a couple of names that I actually want you guys to touch on and to talk about now. The second question here, explain the early Adventist perspective on the relationship between the Advent message and abolition. And, you know, in the video, we heard some names, John Byington, Ellen White. I really kind of want to go to, and well, there's another name too that I wanted to talk about, William Gifford, but I wanted to touch on your views, or if you could tell us a little bit about Ellen and James White with regards to their perspective on abolition. There's always some controversy surrounding Ellen White with, you know, whether or not she was a racist, or, you know, some people like grabbing certain statements that she made out of context and throwing it up and saying, you know, well, she was racist or she held racist views. Could you guys tell us a little bit about James and Ellen White and their views on the abolition of slavery?
Well,
Yeah, they were both dead set against it. Do you want to go ahead, Jeffrey?
No, go ahead. I'll piggyback on you. I was going to mention James White in the South, in the literature in the South.
Yeah, okay.
In the 1860s. Go ahead.
Yeah, you can take that. You can take that part. Yeah, so both of them are dead set against it. James White comments, you know, that he was raised in a thoroughly abolitionist home and so forth in the North, and Ellen makes it very clear with her writings. James makes it very clear with his writings too. I've even found a petition by James White's mother and his oldest sister, for abolitionist causes and so forth. And so they were involved to a minor degree. Here's something important to point out. Like that video that we just saw is really good, and it's encapsulating a lot of stuff that's there. But one thing that's important to stress is that by the time you get to the Seventh-day Adventist period, I wouldn't go to the length that was said there to say that we were central to the movement. We are there on the periphery because we're a small movement. Let's be humble and remember who we are.
Okay.
But as far as us today, that doesn't matter because we exist and we're proud of our small little group of pioneers, very tiny number of people, and what they did speak out on and how it's really impactful and meaningful for us today. During the Millerite period.
So can I jump in for a second though, Kevin?
Yeah.
You said that we were a small movement and we weren't central, because often when we think about abolition, we think about the Quakers, right? Yeah, right. Was our size sort of, does that dictate why we're not spoken about in history with regard to our involvement in abolition?
There's a lot of reasons. The size is certainly part of it. I mean, by the time we get to the middle of the Civil War, we only got about 3,500 Seventh-day Adventists. That's really minuscule. Yeah. And most of these people are your average middle class, even some lower class individuals. We don't have very many really wealthy Adventists at the time. So none of them are super, super prominent. In the Millerite period, however, there were many who were very central and very prominent. Some of the most important abolitionists in abolitionist history were, in fact, Millerites. Okay. But there's other aspects that are critical here. Like most importantly is theory. Okay. Because there's been this theory, and I'm hitting it directly head on in my dissertation, that premillennialist groups. And before I go on, what is a premillennialist? A premillennialist is someone who believes that Christ is coming before the millennium. Okay, that's all Adventists, right? So the theory goes that premillennialists are so concerned about the world to come that they don't care anything about what happens on earth. Right. And literally, Millerites and Adventists have been the quintessential proof that this theory is true. And it's not. Historians have looked at numerous other premillennialist groups and shown in all of those cases that they are not apolitical or asocial and withdrawn. But we have stayed the centerpiece. And so scholars have held on to this theory, and it's morphed in a few different ways because we exist to still supposedly the proof of it. And so I'm finding out that that's entirely and totally wrong. Like there's no sugarcoating it. It's just dead wrong. And so Millerites and Seventh-day Adventists were very political and they stayed engaged. They just simply changed tactics like all other abolitionists did in the 1840s and 1850s. We're really not unique in this regard. And so it's been, we've been held up in an unfair manner. And let's take the blame for ourselves. Look, we don't have enough historians in the church. We should have corrected this long ago. Now, let's be a little bit kind to ourselves. Now that things are digitized, it's a lot easier for us to go through and do the research. And so I recognize that what I'm doing would have been really hard, but not impossible, but really hard before the digital era. So let's be kind, but also critical of ourselves, and let's look at those kinds of things. And so, yeah, it's probably going to take a while for people to realize that that's super wrong and inaccurate. But I think that once I'm finished and I get my work published, it's going to be pretty clear. You don't have to have any sort of weird or fancy definition of politics to make this argument, because Adventists and Millerites were involved in every single aspect of the political spectrum when it came to slavery.
So give me a quick example, if you can, about Ellen White and her abolitionist ideology.
Jeffrey, you want to take it?
Yeah, for the first chapter that I have in my dissertation, I basically survey the thinking, the development of thought among Adventists, and Ellen White is prominent in that. And one thing that I'll say about Ellen White's thought on abolition and on slavery is that she doesn't simply condemn the South for its complicity in slavery, for driving slavery. She actually condemns the North. In fact, in the video we watched in the beginning, it says something about slavery was in the South, not in the North. But slavery was in the North. And not only Ellen White, but some of the other pioneers as well, we see in their writings that they're condemning the North, and they're actually saying the North is under God's judgment. One, because they're complicit in the economy of the South. Two, because they waited too long. Three, because some of their agenda for ending slavery wasn't necessarily their abhorrence of slavery. There were other political, economic issues involved. Anyways, there's multiple reasons. So it's not that hard to arrive at Ellen White's view and reaction to this. There's a few things. For example, James White, I alluded to this earlier, in 1862, he writes this article titled "The Nation" in the Review and Herald, August 1862. And in that article, he basically says that Adventist literature is banned in the South, specifically because Adventist literature up to the 1860s is too anti-slavery. It's viewed, any slaveholder who picks up any Adventist literature is going to feel threatened. And we ask, why would they feel threatened? Because it's pretty obvious from the writings of early Adventists what their view and perspective is on this. The video mentioned John Byington, the first GC president, right? Involved in hiding slaves. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, which Kevin also has written about. I survey this in my dissertation. We have, these are laws established by the government, and we have Adventists taking positions essentially condemning what is in the law. The Review and Herald, 1857, Adventists write that the voice, I'm quoting here, the voice of a dragon is frequently heard in the halls of Congress. I love that line, man. That makes me want to preach. That's a powerful line. By the way, this is 1857. Okay, this is this is 1857. So it's not that hard to arrive at a picture of what the early pioneers, how they conceptualize the issue of slavery and anti-slavery and abolition and all of these things. Loughborough, in his introduction to his book on Revelation 13.
And tell us who Loughborough is.
Jane Loughborough was one of the Adventist pioneers. I think he pioneered the work in California, if I'm mistaken. This is 1857. I think he's converted by James of Illinois, isn't he, Kevin?
Well, he was a Millerite of sorts. Yeah, he gets drawn in really early. He's one of the most active. He's young. We had other ministers, but he was young enough to, like with Jane Andrews, to where they could travel a lot, and then they stood the test of time of several decades of work. And Loughborough, his whole life, Jane Andrews died early, but Loughborough lived and died in the 1920s or something like that.
Long decades and decades of ministry to the church. And Greg, can I read something really quickly?
Yeah, sure.
Just because I think, coupled with our quick pace, I think we should also listen to the words of the pioneer. So this is 1857. Loughborough writes a book called The Two-Horned Beast of Revelation 13, a symbol of the United States. I mean, this is not exactly tactful. This is the United States is the beast of. I mean, this is right in the title. Treason. Treason. This is treason. Okay, so this is from the preface. This is before he gets to before he gets to the first sentence. This is. Hey, by the way, reader, nice to meet you. I'm Mr. Loughborough. Let me give you a little piece of my mind. Here's what he says. Quote: "Are you a politician? Noting the oppressive acts of this government upon the colored portion of our race? Here is a description of your vast republic, a description not only of its past acts, but of its greater oppression which lies in the future." 1857. "We may expect that as the oppressive rulers of our nation manifest no disposition to reform, their fostered spirit of oppression will increase till white men as well as black, free and bond, will suffer from their oppression." End quote. This is from the preface. So my point is this. What were the early Adventists' relation to slavery and to abolition? Well, I think it's pretty clear that they were extremely outspoken, that they didn't hold any punches. This was an evil, abominable in the eyes of God, and any American that's complicit in it is in is in direct rebellion against God. I mean, I'm not
Wow.
sure how much more clear they could have been. And
Let's
there's so
take
much
it-
more. I'm not
Yeah,
going to the Dred Scott case of 1857. There's so
Yep.
much more
Mhm.
U.S. legislation that we have, Adventist literature from the 1850s and 60s lambasting their own government on the issue of racial injustice. Go ahead, Kevin.
Let's make sure that it's very clear here, because when we're looking at denominations as a whole, you need to understand where they sit. The churches in America, North and South, they are supporting and upholding slave power. That's what they're doing. It's
Right.
because they're refusing to condemn it. What does that mean specifically? Specifically, the work of the abolitionists at the very base, and this is the motto over the first decade of its existence of the American Anti-Slavery Society. They are working to tell and teach Americans, both North and South, that slavery is a sin. A sin. See, a lot of people in the North didn't like it, but they wouldn't call it a sin. Because why? That matters so much, because everyone believes the judgment's coming at some point. It doesn't matter if you're Adventist or not. Non-Adventists would say your death, that's your judgment. That's your little mini apocalypse for you, because your world, your chances of righting any wrongs is over. Okay? But Adventists, they draw that apocalypse really close. Say it's going to happen in your lifetime for everybody, whether you die or not. And so you've got to stand before the judgment. And if you have any sin in your heart, you're damned. And so the practice and the project of telling people that slavery is a sin, even supporting it, even if you don't own slaves, being pro-slavery is a sin, that's central.
Wow.
And almost all denominations, literally almost all, every single major denomination, North and South, refuses, and even in the North, to call slavery a sin until the middle of the Civil War. Okay? There are a few exceptions to that. John R. McKivigan, in his book, The War on Pro-Slavery Religion, identified 6 anti-slavery religious groups. The largest was the Wesleyan Methodist Church. Okay? I am going to be arguing, because it's absolutely true, we fit all of the criteria and so forth, that the Seventh-day Adventist Church was another. So in other words, what are the examples of that? We see time after time again, our pioneers left and right, everywhere they're preaching, everywhere they're writing, they're saying that slavery is a sin. And whenever they're near the beginning of the Civil War, when pro-slavery sentiments spike in the North, in many places in the North, and a couple of Adventists come out of the woodwork as pro-slavery, Ellen White drops the gauntlet, as you saw in the video, and says that if there's someone pro-slavery, they must be disfellowshipped. And there's no Adventists in the South. None. They're not owning slaves. They are just racist people. And so the one she calls out, Alexander Ross, he lives in New York. Slavery had been abolished since 1827 there. And so he just supported it. And she said, no, he's got to be disfellowshipped. We cannot have any of those people walking with us, because that is not what we stand for. These are the markers of an abolitionist church. And there's other examples. Jeffrey says,
that's great, Kevin.
Of our press being, cut off from the South.
Can I mention one more thing, Greg?
Yes,
Sorry, you're gonna have a hard time shutting people up on this. Talk.
Let's go.
I think. No, I was referring to myself, Kevin. I think this is really important. In the 1850s, multiple of the early prominent Adventist writers insulted, and I know for Canadians, they're like, "What's the big deal? You guys up north, our northern neighbors are way more level-headed when it comes to politics, but we're crazy down here." So in the United States, the nation's founding document, I don't even know what Canada's founding documents are, but the U.S. founding documents are revered as divine documents.
Yes.
The Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, right? And even Adventists
do that right now with the things that are happening right now in the U.S. Everything is about being unconstitutional, and
exactly.
Right?
You hear that phrase over and over again, because what matters most is where do we stand, right, in relation to the founding document. So I say all of that to say this: it's pretty crazy. Jane Andrews says this. Loughborough says this. I think Uriah Smith says this in the 80s. Something to this respect, and I'm quoting here Loughborough, but they basically mock the Declaration of Independence. Now, you all know the Declaration of Independence says that all men are created, equal and so forth.
Yeah.
This is a quote. This is what they said, quote, "All men are created free and equal, except 3.5 million slaves." End quote. They say that over and over again. In other words, they're basically throwing mud at the most revered doctrines of political philosophy in their own country, at these divine documents. They're basically dragging those documents in the mud, saying, this is a complete joke.
My favorite one on this, because we also speak out on this in regard to free blacks in the North. So in 1854, Anthony Burns is living in Boston. He's captured by slave catchers, and he's sent back south. Okay. And an Adventist pioneer named Edwin R. Seaman, he's living in Rochester, New York, and that's where Adventist headquarters are at that time. He's living right there, and he writes in a scathing article that James White publishes in the Review. And he goes on about that declaration, saying how, all men are created free and equal and all this kind of stuff. And he says, if this is not going to be the most hypocritical document on the face of the earth, it should be amended thus. And he emphasizes this word: all white men are created free and equal. And then he goes on and says, isn't the two-horned beast, this corrupting dragon and all this kind of stuff? No, it's no joke.
So so before we move real quickly here, can one of you talk a bit about John Clark and what John Clark had to say about the whole
Joseph
idea?
Clark.
Is it Joseph Clark?
Yeah, that's Kevin.
But there was a John Clark. John was his brother. John was
I thought it was okay. So it was Joseph that said that touched on the whole 3/5 of a person thing. Okay, can you just tell us quickly a bit about that, and then we're gonna move on. What did he have to say about this idea that blacks were being deemed 3/5 rather of a person?
Yeah, you want that one? You want that one, Jeffrey? You want me to do it? Whatever.
Go ahead.
So the 3/5 clause is passed early, at the founding of our nation, right? And that is essentially whenever you're trying to figure out how many representatives you have for the state and all this and so forth for electing officers and so forth, count people. That's why we have the census, right? Well, what do you do with the slaves? Are they people or not? And so Americans were unsure, white Americans, let's be honest, white Americans were unsure that they were really human beings. And so they were not going to count them as human beings in the censuses. However, the South wanted more power because most people lived in the North.
Their representation in Congress is their representation.
Human,
right?
They're close enough, maybe, right? I mean, they kind of look like us. Just there's some really key differences, And so they're like, maybe they're just 3/5 of a person, and so they counted them legally on paper in censuses as 3/5 of a person. But let's check the records. We don't name them. They're just a number.
Wow.
Negro one, whatever, Negro man, Negro woman, Negro child. That's all you see in the censuses. And so never let 3/5 of a person. And so Joseph Clark, among other Adventists, but he writes in a really eloquent statement here, showing how America is this most duplicitous, dragonic beast because of the fact that they don't recognize black people as fully human. And he also throws in that statement how we've treated Native Americans.
I was about to say that.
Go, you take that one.
Well, Greg, I don't know at what point we're ready to zoom out. We're talking about the black community. We're talking about abolition and slavery.
Yeah.
I think it's important to note that the way that early Adventists articulated their advocacy for Black Americans, they then took that and it became a lens to how they viewed other non-white peoples around the world. But I'll get to that in a little later whenever you're ready to branch out. But I wanted to say one more thing. In train with what Kevin was saying, that
Joseph Clark, Native American.
Yeah. Going back to the documents, right? The founding principles of the United States, that I mentioned that the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution are revered, right? Another thing that is revered in our civil religion is the 4th of July as a celebration for the lofty principles of the, where I'm going with this.
Yes.
Well, we all know, that in 1852, Frederick Douglass, which we alluded to earlier, presented this speech that has since become just, it's a classic. It's a masterpiece. And the speech was titled, "What to the Slave is the 4th of July?" He gets up and he basically preaches this incredible message about, here we are celebrating the 4th of July, and yet my people, he says, they can't celebrate this day. They're enslaved by so forth and so forth, right? Well, the American Sentinel, Adventist run periodical, which I'm writing about this is like the prominent periodical in my dissertation.
Mhm.
They publish later, this is decades later, right? They publish, so 4th of July is coming, and they decide, you know what? Let's publish this article for 4th of July. And the article is titled, Why Celebrate the 4th? And they basically come out and say, man, I just want to read it to you, but I won't. They basically come out and say the same thing that Douglas said back in the 50s. They say, so what again is the point of the 4th of July? Now, why is this important? Because we're talking about slavery, abolition. Of course, that becomes outlawed after the Civil War. So I don't want our listeners to think, well, great, this is all nice and dandy, but that was back when slavery was around. What does that have to do today? We're not dealing with legal slavery, right? The point of this is that this is in the 1890s. This is right before the year 1900. This is decades after slavery ended. And we have Adventists saying, why are we celebrating the 4th of July? Look at the way inequality and injustice is cemented in American institutions and in American policies. We have no business celebrating this day because it's meaningless. That's 1899.
Wow.
So I say that because I think it's important to know we're not just talking about slavery.
Right.
We're talking about, as I alluded to in the beginning, we're talking about a broader picture, a broader concept of human rights and human dignity under which slavery falls.
Of course. Okay, so this is some heavy stuff, and we're gonna take a quick break to sort of let people digest the stuff that you guys are hitting them with. But when we come back, I want us to talk a bit about how the church sort of has veered off. Where did we sort of lose sight of what our pioneers were all about with regards to social justice? So hang in there, stay tuned. And when we come back, we're going to start transitioning into where we are today.
I've been walking with my face turned to the sun. Weight on my shoulders, a bullet in my gun. Oh, I got eyes in the back of my head, just in case I have to run. I do what I can when I can, while I can for my people. While the clouds roll back and the stars fill the night, that's when I'm gonna stand up, take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home, far across the river. Can you hear freedom calling, calling me to answer? Gonna keep on keeping on. I can feel it in my bones. Early in the morning, before the sun begins to shine, we're gonna start moving towards that separating line. I'm wading through muddy water. You know I got a made up mind, and I don't mind if I lose any blood on the way to salvation. And I'll fight with the strength that I got until I die. So I'm gonna stand up, take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home.
All right, so we are back. Hope everyone enjoyed that video. Man, and I'm seeing some comments from some people that, wow, Murthel Mitchell, I haven't seen this guy in a minute. Listen, I wanna dive into something really important here as we transition into Adventist sort of, well, just transitioning to where we are now as a people and as a denomination. But before we get there, when we think about the FBI and social justice movements, we think about what they did with regards to the Black Panthers in the 60s and what they, their involvement with the civil rights movement and Dr. King. But I think a lot of people would find it really interesting and surprising that the Adventist Church was actually being surveilled and sort of on the radar for the FBI. And I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about that now. If we could touch on why the FBI had an interest in the Seventh-day Adventist Church and our stance, I guess, with regard to social justice issues. And I believe this was happening during World War I. So if you guys could sort of talk to that a bit, why were we, the denomination Seventh-day Adventists, under the radar of the FBI?
There's a lot of reasons, actually. So first of all, you have a traditional non-combatant position towards the military that we formed during the Civil War, where we reluctantly said, okay, if you're drafted, you can serve in a non-combatant role. And so Adventists weren't wanting to, they were not active patriots, if you will. Can you imagine being patriotic when this two-horned beast is governing? So no, they were not patriotic, and they were reluctant participants in the war, and that is still holding to a fair amount in the World War I era. Now, of course, we've always had Adventists who volunteered as combatants and so forth, but nevertheless, that's a big issue, non-combatancy. Number two, you've got lots of Adventists who apparently are supporting labor unions. The degree to which they're doing so is needing some further research. But one thing you could check out, and I haven't actually had time to read the whole thing myself, but George Knight has a recent book out where he shows how Adventists of the 20th century really went through and modified and tamed Ellen White herself on her stance to labor unions, and it made it look like Ellen White was against labor unions, which isn't true. So you need to read and check out that piece by him. And so there were Adventists that were supportive of labor unions. That, of course, was connected with socialism and communism, and the government was convinced that we were thoroughly red, as in the color.
Okay.
So in other words, they thought everything, the Review and all the Pacific Press, Southern Publishing, they thought all of those are the three big presses we had at the time, by the way. They thought that they were just putting out socialist material, and part of one of the biggest reasons is what we've already talked about, the two-horned beast.
That's what I was thinking.
This is, I think, probably the most important thing, because come on, what's going on in America during World War I is a real big, strong push for its propaganda campaign known as 100% Americanism. You've got to be 100% American, and you're going to show you that loyalty through a whole host of ways. Participating in the military, supporting the Red Cross, wearing your bell buttons, going for Liberty loan drives, all stuff to give support to the military in one way, shape, or form, and the cause, right? 100% Americanism. That's Woodrow Wilson's sort of tagline or whatever. That's still, by the way, the tagline of the American Foreign Legion. But a big part of that, of course, is you're not going to be 100% American if you're in any way supporting the Reds, or if you're Black. And so Black religious movements and Black people in America were widely surveilled by the state, etc. You can see the Church of God in Christ, which is a Black Pentecostal religion. There's literature out on that. And so, Adventists are lumped in for all these reasons, but we're only one of many religions that are surveilled heavily. Key thing here is what would become the FBI. They were just called the Bureau of Investigation. They were formed in 1908 or something like that. But World War I is the first real time that they were able to test themselves. And the Bureau is really developed in World War I as a thing, and they gain lots of agents, and they get to be a lot more sizable and important during the war. And they go after everyone who seems subversive, including religions. Civil rights and like First Amendment rights had not been legally tested in courts, and so people are writing roughshod over this all the time. There is all sorts of manner of censorship and oppression from the state. Okay. Mm-hmm. A lot of people think that, in this country that like, oh, if someone doesn't publish my thing because they don't like it, or if someone bans Donald Trump, the president of the United States, off of Twitter, that's violation of the First Amendment right. Give me a break. Private individuals, private companies have always had the right to do something like that, but the federal government cannot. That's what the First Amendment protects. And so the federal government during this era is writing roughshod over the First Amendment on both the civil liberties stuff and the religious liberties stuff. So those are some of the reasons why they are surveilled.
Okay. One of the things I'm noticing, Greg, my final chapter 4, is going to trace. Kevin, we haven't even had a chance to chat about this stuff, but that during the 1890s, Adventists were criticizing what the U.S. government was doing in China, in the Philippines, in different parts of the world. And during that time, I am finding significant evidence that Adventists were writing saying that the way the U.S. government was trying to silence domestic U.S.-based opposition to American policies. For example, in the Philippine-American War in the late 1890s, the U.S. government was basically pressuring the press. The U.S. military was pressuring journalists not to be publishing bad reports about what the U.S. soldiers were doing in the Philippines. When you read the American Sentinel and the Signs of the Times, Adventists, they're following this very carefully in the news, and they immediately go to the Adventist press and they're publishing this stuff. And one of the things they're saying is they're warning that the way that the U.S. government is reaching over to hinder and to curtail criticism from groups, even religious groups, that in the future is simply going to get much, much worse. They're doing this in the 1890s. Okay. So by the time we get to 1916, 1917, World War I, their prophecy is basically being fulfilled. Yeah. Because so Kevin mentioned a bunch of fascinating. Kevin, the whole German thing too, Kevin.
Oh, I forgot that. Yeah, the German thing is huge.
A lot of the membership in the worldwide Adventist movement are part of the
German Empire, which is German Germany, right? Yeah, that covers a lot more territory than modern day Germany,
but nonetheless be viewed by Americans as an enemy nation, an enemy race. So that's another reason. But the point I want to emphasize is everything we've talked about since the beginning of this panel, to me, is one of the central reasons why the government, once they start reading Adventist literature, begin to think, wait a second, these people are against the U.S. government. I mean, think about it. Just the concept of Revelation 13 and how the beast represents, that's not exactly flattering to the U.S. government.
American.
the opposition that we've been describing about the dragon speaks in the halls of U.S. Congress, the criticizing the American founding, all of that is a recipe for 1917, a heightened state of emergency and crises where America is in wartime. The last thing it needs, and it's also fighting perceived conspiracies of internal infiltration, as Kevin mentioned, from socialists, from that's just a recipe for identifying individuals who are exacerbating this situation. Now, oh man, there's so much to say on this. I ran into a report I was doing research at the GC there in Maryland at the headquarters, and I was reading the report of E.R. Palmer, who at the time was the manager of the Review and Herald. He reports, and we've known this, Doug Morgan, by the way, shout out to Douglas Morgan, historian, Adventist historian, included a little snippet of this in his book back in 20 years ago, Adventism and the American Republic. He included a little snippet of this World War I discrimination and surveillance against Adventism. And then Kevin went out and found a bazillion documents from the U.S. government, and he's emailed those to me. So I'm drooling over this stuff. But when I was at GC, I was interested in, okay, what was happening what were they saying inside the church during this surveillance? And I found this report from E.R. Palmer, manager of the Review and Herald. He tells us that when 2 government agents visited the Review and Herald headquarters there, they show up to his office and they have 2 suitcases with them, briefcases with them. They sit him down and they interrogate him point by point on what Adventists are saying against the U.S. government. In their briefcases, they open up and they have Adventist books and Adventist pamphlets. And as they open the pamphlets, Palmer writes, they have underlining in all. Think about this. You have agents from the U.S. Department of Defense, I think it was.
Department of Justice.
Department of Justice, the DOJ.
Yeah.
And they have carefully outlined, sentence by sentence, the things that they view to be of concern to the U.S. government. So that tells you the level that we're talking. And of course, and then I found another report.
And we have copies of that stuff still.
Mm-hmm.
I have copies of that in those declassified files where they have taken pictures and photographs page by page, underlinings there, circling things, everything that's subversive. Yeah. I didn't mean to cut you off, but we have.
No, that's absolutely incredible. And Kev, as I mentioned earlier, Kevin found tons of U.S. documents on this. I found at the Library of Congress, I found a report sent by a government agent who was spying at a Adventist camp meeting. And he's writing back to his superior, his supervisor in DC, saying, okay, I'm here at these Adventists. They're crazy. I sat into one of the meetings and I get the feeling that they're but they're not. When you ask, what did he mean by, what was his concern? And the concern was exactly what Kevin just said, that these people were anti-war, that they had positions that were perceived to be unpatriotic because they weren't enough in bed with American patriotism.
Okay.
Now, again, I go back to our friendly, docile neighbors in the great north of Canada. It's hard for you guys to imagine this. It's hard to you guys to imagine this. But in the U.S., there's some seriously gung-ho folks over here. And even in the church, right? Even in the church. And so what I take from that is, it's interesting that we went from being a movement whose message is so kingdom-centered that earthly kingdoms feel threatened, to now a movement where sometimes when you log on Facebook and you look at people's posts during the election or whatever, you have a hard time realizing, okay, well, where is our allegiance? Is our allegiance to a political party, or is our allegiance to the gospel?
Okay, so this is where we got to move, right? Because, when I think about Adventism now and how we look at, the Adventist church is this, vegetarian eating, Pathfinder promoting, just really sort of, it would almost appear to me that if our pioneers were to see our church right now, they would be like, well, who are you guys? Because this is not who we were. And this isn't how we came into being. So I kind of want to ask here, how did we sort of, and I got to be mindful because we're winding down here, but how did we
winding down? I thought we just finished
ramping up, eh? I know, man. I know.
I thought that was just the introduction.
Not everyone are, the history nerds.
I thought this was a Caribbean church, man. What's going on? Where are your roots? You've lost the vision of your Caribbean roots, brother.
We have lost our way.
We're just starting.
You're absolutely right, man.
I'm okay with eating lunch, actually. I'm okay with eating lunch. So if we stop, at some point, whatever, I'm cool with that.
Oh, man,
I also like talking, though.
I'm sorry, man. If it was up to me, we'd be going on until 4:00. But
that's all right. I'll grab my fruit snacks and we'll keep going.
you came prepared, man.
We're eating into your last.
I got my Adventism right here too. My veggies, right?
Greg, we're eating into your last precious minutes.
Wow.
That's right. I'll shut up.
It's all good, guys. Honestly, what I wanted to ask is, when did we sort of transition out of this radical movement that was, sort of, from what you guys are saying, we were ahead of our time with regards to our thinking about social justice and our pairing of social justice with spirituality. When did we sort of veer away from that? And you know, what are we looking at for the future? Is there a difference between political social activism and biblical social activism? What is our responsibility as Christians? That type of a thing. So we're winding down.
That's a huge question.
I know, man. I know.
He's like, all right, guys, 60 seconds, break it down.
Basically, yes.
Only the central, most complicated issue in Adventism today. Break it down in 60 seconds.
Yeah.
Because you guys are pros and you can, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, you know, when did we start veering away from this? And you know, what does that leave us with now and going forward?
Well, first of all, this is actually a pressing question now because of the research that Jeffrey and I and Ben Baker and Doug Morgan and others are doing. Michael Campbell's in there. Ron Graybill even before that. I mean, there's several of us who have been looking at these things, but like, it's now an issue because we had historians telling us for the longest time that we were not involved in the abolition movement. Social justice was central to our movement and so forth. But now we know that it was. And so now it is a pressing question. So what on earth happened and where does that change come from? So let me just preface this to just save Jeffrey and I's backside. We don't have a good answer yet because no one studied it yet because we couldn't yet. But we have some ideas and we can share those ideas with you. And so let me start off with Arnabon Temps, right? Okay. Arnabon Temps is a Black Seventh Adventist. He's very prominent. If you know anything about American history and what's called the Harlem Renaissance in the early 20th century, Arnabon Temps is a shining leader in that, and he's also Seventh-day Adventist. And he recognized he lived in this period of shifting and changing, which you really see like World War I as being a nice fulcrum point. There's some precursors to that. There's things that happen after, but World War I's dead center. And he's right there, writing probably in the 1920s or so, and he aims at the South. He says what led to this change, because he could talk with he could talk with people who were living pioneers and so forth. He knew some of these people so personally, so he knew something changed. We've just simply forgot it. And so he says whenever Adventists moved down south, that was a big factor. I think he's right. I don't think that's the only factor, but I think he's right. And you see evidence of that. So like when Adventists go down south, abolitionists had been so strong on really, it was propaganda, you know, against slavery, against slaveholders and so forth. And so white people, not just Seventh Adventists, but white people from the North would travel down south and they would find out that white people in the South could be really nice, at least to white people. And so they start to have their heads turned. And you can see some of you can see even James White, you know, saying that his prejudice is going, you know, and so forth, and how he recognizes that these people are nice, who are holding Jefferson Davis up at like a picture of him up in their houses and stuff. But one of my favorite, and I got to share this guy, Joseph Clark. We already talked about him, but Joseph Clark recognizes and sees Reconstruction ending in like 1877, right around that time. And that's when he and his wife choose to go down to Texas to start teaching the freed people to read and, of course, to try to lead them and guide them into the Adventist faith. And he goes down there. He recognizes the same thing as Arnabon Temps and says that he thinks that people coming down south become, quote, tinctured by the great goddess caste. Okay. And I love Clark and his wife, Joseph and Sarah Clark, because he says that they absolutely refuse to bow down to the great goddess. They would not segregate. They would not do these things. They chose not to, and they got death threats. KKK is running all over Texas at this time. In fact, you have historians say that there were so many people slaughtered and murdered and assassinated by the KKK that it was impossible to keep an accurate record. So, I mean, this is no idle threat. This is no idle boast. And Kilgore, who's there, he is Robert Kilgore is head of the mission, okay? And he and the Clarks will start to butt heads on this a bit. They will start to have different ways to move forward. And Kilgore wants to go ahead and segregate just to keep the peace, to keep people alive. And the Black people there are supporting this too, by the way, because they care about their lives as well. No surprise, no shock. Right. But the Clarks refuse, and so they leave after just 16 months. They lasted almost a year and a half, but they left after 16 months because they refused to segregate. But after this point, we start to segregate services in the South, and that will creep up north. Doug Morgan's done really great work on that in Washington, D.C. with
What
Debates
about
to the
this?
Chief. And Change Agents just came out, brand new book. Got to get it. I don't have a copy yet.
Who's the author? Sorry.
This Doug Morgan, our boy Doug Morgan, and this is his latest and greatest. But this now moves into the church. How did racial discrimination enter into the church?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so that just basically picks up what Kevin was saying and takes it into the later decades of the 20th century. And that's a theme that others have worked on, and we encourage people to consult that literature.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to read that yet. That book came out what, a month or two ago?
Me either. I just ordered it. I haven't had a chance to read it either.
Yeah.
Wow.
So Doug's got the answer, I'm sure.
All right. So apparently we've been given a little more time because this conversation is so juicy. So I want to backtrack a little bit, and I want to talk about how early Adventists use the following methods of activism. So can we talk a little bit about civil disobedience? So one of the things that comes to mind is the fugitive slave law. Can you talk about Adventists and their stance on the fugitive slave law and their activity with that law?
Your turn, Jeffrey.
Well, we've kind of alluded to it. We know that, as I mentioned, it's mentioned several times. I'm trying to remember now. I know Loughborough for sure talks about it.
Oh, they all do.
We alluded to Ellen White later mentions, hey, that's a law that you Adventists should disobey, which is crazy. She's
right. So that's what I wanted you to talk about. What is she
advocating? Disobedience to U.S. laws, which is crazy.
So first of all, what is the fugitive slave? Let's talk first of all. What is the fugitive slave law? And you're saying that Ellen White says to disobey it, like she actually gives Adventists permission to disobey the law of the land. So what is the fugitive slave law first? Let's just break it down quickly and then.
So
go ahead. No, you go ahead, Kevin.
Well, at our nation's founding, America, 1793, there is the fugitive slave law that's passed that basically says that, people in the South can get their slaves back. However, in many places in the North, particularly New England, there are personal liberty laws passed. Pennsylvania also, and so that is that states have all of these sort of laws that they pass that allow that are going to gum up the process. And so by the time you get to 1850, many of these states in the North, really Pennsylvania and New England, they are going to say that there's all these laws that they have, like slaves have the right to habeas corpus, and they have right to trial by jury, these kinds of things. And so they're gumming up the whole process. And so people in the South really are not able to get their slaves back. 1850 will change that, and it will make it law, federal law, above states' rights, to say that white people in the North are required to assist slave catchers in getting their slaves back.
Yes.
And there's no right to trial by jury. There's no habeas corpus. There's nothing. What you have is a fugitive slave or many kidnappings, many people who were not slaves before who were kidnapped. Yeah. They're going to be brought before just an officer, and the officer is given, I believe it's $10 if they send the slave to the South or the free black and they allow them to kidnap, and they only get $5 if they release them. I'm pretty sure that's the numbers. I know it's double. So you receive double payment if you sent the slave to the South. And if you broke this law, if you were harboring a fugitive slave, or if you refused to assist slave catchers, you're facing up to 6 months in jail and a $3,000 fine. Now stop right there and think about it. That doesn't sound like much, although $3,000 is a big fine for me. I'm poor, okay, but that's up to 3 years' wages for someone at that era. Mm-hmm. Okay, so an editor of a newspaper, someone like Joshua Leavitt, for example, he's given $1,000 salary for a year. Good job in editing and anti-slavery. So you're talking about 3 years of salary and up to 6 months without the man of the house, probably the primary breadwinner, working. You're going to cripple your family, probably for the rest of your life. You're going to be debtors and paupers until your dying day. So this is no joke. Mm-hmm. This is serious. And there are numerous cases, most of which were all along the border between slavery and non-slavery, where people are caught, and you have people that are going to spend years in prison. You've got people that are going to die in prison who are abolitionists and so forth. So this is no joke. And in 1850, that's when we craft our doctrine of the two-horned beast. That's when we understood that in Scripture.
Okay.
So we do that within days. It's actually happening. This is being crafted as the fugitive slave law is still being debated in Congress. We've got Samuel W. Rose. It's literally happening in tandem. As Adventists are watching this, they're like, this country is gone to hell in a handbasket. It is this beast.
That is such an incredible point. And I just wish more people would hear that. Our understanding of key passages in the book of Revelation were crystallized in the context of laws in the United States that were violating the human dignity of people on the basis of their color. That's an incredible thing to understand. Can I say one thing? Moving away from race, you're talking about civil disobedience, subversiveness. We get it also in other respects, like Sunday laws, right? So I know this is not related to race, but I found the piece in 1899 where the GC secretary reports that if you were to add up all the amount of time Adventists spent in jail by virtue of their faith convictions, it would amount to 1,200 days in jail, just for the simple fact of refusing to honor Sunday as a holy day.
They were working on Sunday.
Yeah. So anyway, that's a side point, but it's just to show you that there is a broad context here for Adventists engaging in civil disobedience.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, this is who we were. Okay. Got you. Can we talk a little bit about pulpit activism? What did they have to say from the pulpit about abolition and enslavement? And I know, Jeffrey, you like to your specialty really is about Reconstruction. Was there anything going on during Reconstruction with regards to what Adventists had to say about the way Black people were being treated during that time period?
Actually, if I can turn the tables on you real quick.
Okay.
We alluded earlier that if we can speak in terms of racial discrimination, because that broadens the situation.
Okay.
It includes Black people, but it also includes the colored races in Asia.
Okay.
So in other words, white people in the United States in the late, and now we're even past Reconstruction. Now we're in the 1890s. They viewed not only African people of African descent, but other non-white peoples from around the world as
that's the era of the white man's burden with Rudyard Kipling, right? And he's talking about the Filipinos. Yeah,
these are half civilized people. These are partially barbarian people. That was the mentality at the time. So to answer your question, the pulpit activism that I have studied has to do with sermons that were then later printed in the Adventist press.
Okay.
So we see sermons, we see articles, but we also see sermons of Adventists protesting what the U.S. government was doing to other non-white peoples. For example, in the can I find that real quick? During the Philippine-American War, and you'll see how wrapped this is in the notion of race. Because during the Philippine-American War, what Adventists were preaching was this, and this is a quote from the Sentinel: "The war in the Philippines is a, quote, a race war, particularly a war of Anglo-Saxons against a colored race," end quote. So you see there that the activism that they basically crystallized for the Black in regard to relation to the Black community, they're now applying that to other people groups around the world that are being discriminated against by virtue of their race. And so that's what I have found in the message, whether it's preached, whether it's written, a powerful testimony of advocacy regarding human dignity that's been violated on the basis of people's race.
Okay.
So another aspect of sort of pulpit activism that blends with the boycotting and so forth that you were talking about before is their stance on the national fast. Now, this is going back to the Civil War, the pre-Civil War era. And there were many times when the president of the United States, especially during the Civil War, but even before that, is going to say to people in the North, we've got to hold a day of fast and prayer to God because we want whatever to happen. During the Civil War, it's for us to win battles, but before that, it's, some sort of crisis in the nation, and they're wanting to observe that. Adventists say absolutely not. So they'll gather for worship, but they will not observe this fast because of the slavery.
Okay.
Because of the fact that Black people are being oppressed in this country. And so they absolutely refuse to participate in those things. Much like, Jeffrey talked about, why celebrate the 4th?
Right.
I'm sure we don't have documents that I've seen yet, but I have no doubt there probably must have been several Adventists who refused to participate in the 4th of July celebrations before the Civil War. I have no doubt that fits with the character of who they were. Mm-hmm. And there are probably also many of them who celebrated, by contrast, the 1st of August. Okay. And that's because of the liberation of slavery in most of the British Empire.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
First. And so those are traditions set and established by abolitionists that will just continue to carry on. So those are forms of protest. Most of it, when it comes to the pulpit, it's not much different than they're writing those. So yeah, the two-horned beast is the center, right there.
Okay.
Two-horned beast central.
So so just to sort of tie things together, because I could go on. I would love to go on, but I want to get you guys' take on just sort of where we are right now. And we've got the question right there. Should we be joined to political groups to make our statements, or should our activism be simply tied to our biblical beliefs? What are your thoughts? A lot of young people want to know this. What do they do with this passion that they have to get out there and fight social injustice? So what are your thoughts?
One of the things we do find in the Adventist literature, because we could be at risk of oversimplifying this topic. This is a very complicated topic. Alongside everything we've said in the literature, we also find that Adventists from the beginning have struggled with this very question. At what point are we too political in a sense of losing focus to church mission? From the beginning, there's been concerns about aligning with political parties. There's clear counsel from Ellen White and from different Adventist leaders against political alliances.
Partisan alliances. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, partisan politics, partisan alliances. In my opinion, one of the most impressive Black Adventists in the 1890s is a man by the name of Louis Sheaf. And of course, Doug Morgan wrote a biography on him. I encourage you guys to. Sheaf was one of the most powerful preachers the church had. Okay. And he was a Black Adventist. And Sheaf gets invited to a political event because he's known throughout the country as one of the greatest preachers. He goes to a political event by a political party whose governor was just trying to ramp up votes. They invite Sheaf thinking, oh, he's gonna promote us and help us to get votes, because it was Lincoln's party at the time, the Republican Party. Right. Sheaf shows up. The governor's sitting there thinking, okay, come on, get us. And Sheaf preaches a message where he basically says, we have zero obligation. The Black community has no obligation to any political party. And it's so controversial speech that the newspapers run it. And then basically this guy threw Lincoln under the bus. And I want to read you something. This is 1895 from the Urbana Daily Times. This is a secular newspaper. And Sheaf responds to the criticism. He basically doubles down. He says, yeah, I said what I said. I am a Christian. I believe in justice. That does not mean I'm in bed with any political party. And this is what he says, quote, my position is that the Negro is not under obligation to any party. He says of Lincoln's party, that Lincoln's party basically has failed the Black community. And then he says this, quote, what the Negro needs is simply to cease being a tail for any political kite. End quote. I mean, just a brilliant preacher. So basically, I say that to say this. Should Adventists, what is the position today? I take Sheaf's lead on that. Okay. The answer is yes, of course. He was known as an activist, yet he refused He refused to align himself with some political agenda, some political party, because his alliances were elsewhere. Now, that's easy for me to say. How does that play out? Well, no panel can answer the intricacies of that question. What we do know is, while yes, Adventists were intensely engaged, there's equally strong testimony that they were constantly worried about the church not aligning itself with some worldly political party, because that is contrary to the prophetic calling as well.
Got you. Wow.
It's not an easy answer, but
yeah,
we don't have time to get into that.
There is a good term, though, a good political term, I think, that can be used to describe early Adventists and so forth during this period, the whole period that we've got, and that's Christian anarchism. Now stop, hold the phone. Whoa. Anarchist. What anarchists? Adventists are anarchists. Anarchism is a political concept, and when you add Christian to it, it literally mean it does not mean it is definitely against chaos. Christian anarchists are against chaos, against having no order. They're not for that. But what their point is simply this: it can be wrapped up in a nutshell that they are for God's government, God's laws, and not man's. And so when they coincide, no problem. But if the laws of man ever contradict the laws of God, you follow the laws of God, no question asked. This is why Ellen White tells Adventists to disobey the fugitive slave law.
Right.
And she sees that in vision, so that God himself is revealing that. Adventists have been saying that long before she ever did, but she eventually says it too. And so,
Kevin, I think you would agree here, in an American context, what that means for me, and I'm speaking for me, that means that I am not a loyal Republican. I am not a loyal Democrat.
Yes, that's exactly.
I am neither of those.
That's exactly the point.
I am not aligning myself to some political agenda. I'm aligning myself to principles that I draw from my worldview. Now, I then observe the world around me, the happenings of the world around me, the social ills of the world around me, and then I apply those ideals. What policies can I support and endorse in order to improve the lot of human beings?
Absolutely.
Individuals, go, Kevin, go.
The Adventists are all about this, all about social justice. You actually need to participate and be active in this front to prepare for the advent of Christ, second advent of Christ. This is crucial for your faith. Ellen White says so much about Adventists being reformers and about how reform is part of what we should be. Okay, but she also has many of those statements about politics that, frankly, too many people have confused, and that's because they were consistently against partisan politics. Okay, and the simple reason is this: going along with everything Jeffrey's saying, the parties they don't have it right. They're not on God's side. They're going to get it right. Both parties are going to oppress, and they have throughout history. Both parties have oppressed different groups of people. They're not solving the issue. Look at today. In America, at least, we've got tons of issues going on. I can speak about mass incarceration. I can also speak about issues with undocumented immigrants and so forth, and our detention centers, and now the wall, and all sorts of stuff. I mean, America is this beast still. Like, choose either of those parties to go along with. But
Trump is gone, but that doesn't mean that
Trumpism lives.
Doesn't mean Revelation 13 suddenly changed.
Yeah, that's right. It lives on. And the point is this: like, you cannot use that. You can't throw the politics card out and say, "Well, I'm not going to get involved." Adventists began to throw the politics card during the shifting time of becoming conservative. And so we started throwing the politics card only when it came to race. We've never dropped politics from Adventism. We have consistently argued for against religious liberty violations and so forth, and against blue laws and all that. We've consistently done that.
Which is political.
Like tobacco and alcohol, we've consistently been political there. But we started saying, racial justice, we can't get into politics, guys. It's literally just masking people's racism, and white people's racism, and it literally is just gumming up issues. That's not...
I think that's the sign right there that this is over.
I told her that we've done it too. My phone is silent, but it's my computer, so I apologize.
No worries.
Sarah, we're not done yet. She's on the phone, but I can't hear her. So anyways, this is something that can't happen. We cannot support, if you're loyal to a party, what are you going to do if there's a crisis.
Mm.
And if you're, let me add another step here. If you're loyal to your nation, we're global. Boom.
Yeah.
This is a global movement. This is a global church. If you're loyal to your country and there's a conflict, what are you going to do? We've never talked about it this way before. But in World War I and World War II, and probably there are definitely other conflicts as well, but especially those, that's a time of Adventists killing Adventists.
Wow.
We've never talked about it that way, but that is what happened.
Okay.
Okay. So what are you going to do? If you're going to have your loyalty to a party, your loyalty to a country, how can you serve God? But you cannot use it as a crutch to say, oh, I can't get involved in social justice because this is politics. I'm sorry. You have to.
Okay.
If you want to go to heaven, if you want to be there, there is no color line in heaven. Ellen White says we're journeying to the same heaven. If you want to be there, then you better be on the right side now, because this is testing ground.
Make sure your Adventist worldview is shaping your political views and not your political views shaping your Adventist worldview.
Right.
Okay. So listen, man, you guys, wow. This was amazing stuff. And, we've got to wrap up. But people want to know where they can find you guys, man. They want to know where they can get your resources, your books. For me, my introduction to you guys was through video. I stumbled on you guys on YouTube and ended up spending a few Friday nights just watching, the stuff with the two of you, Baker and Douglas Morgan, and then also Kevin. You're I think you're kind of used to going overtime, because I saw the thing with you and Ivor Myers. You guys ended up going on for something like 4 hours.
Oh man,
right?
I had to go to Greg so bad. I mean, Greg, we're just being honest. Yeah.
Was for the people asking for resources, Greg. Yes. They can consult Kevin's program that you alluded to there. They can look at the Light Bearers program that you saw, Greg. There are over 4 hours of this stuff. Some of the stuff that I said here, you might hear there.
So is that more? Is that Light Bearers? Was that Light Bearers?
Yeah, it's on. I think Light Bearers YouTube, Light Bearers Face. Honestly, I haven't seen it myself. I don't know. I know it was recorded.
If people put your names into YouTube, so if you put Jeffrey Rosario, Kevin Burton, and Ben Baker into. It'll come up.
It should come up. If not, I think it's even on Ben Baker's website. Another thing, both Kevin and myself have written for the Adventist Encyclopedia that is now online. Look at Kevin's articles. I wrote 2 articles there, one on A.T. Jones, one on Adventism in the Philippine Spanish-American War. You'll see some of that here.
I've got a couple in the review. You go to Google, you search for my name, and you search for slavery, or you add Joseph Bates in there.
Kevin has a great article on Joseph Bates. Type in Kevin Burton Joseph Bates review. That's a fantastic article. He has other articles on it. You can look at those resources. Type in Douglas Morgan. Look at his biography of Louis Sheaf. Check out this book that I mentioned.
Yep, that's hot off the press.
Benjamin Baker, which I don't know what I'm doing on this panel. We need to get Benjamin Baker in here next and let him go to town with this stuff.
Well, we wanted all 3 of you, but he wasn't available. Okay, and we've got a question. Who's the author of Change Agents?
Douglas
Morgan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Douglas Morgan.
Hot off the press.
Yes, yeah, Ben Baker's, I think it's Black SDA history.
Yeah. It's down.
All your people should consult Benjamin Baker's website, SDA Black History.
BlackSDAHistory.org, but it's down right now because he's updating it. So, but his YouTube channel's up.
Yes.
So check out his YouTube channel, Black SDA History YouTube channel. But yeah, Jeffrey and I are working on our dissertations, which, Lord willing, will be books shortly thereafter. So, but that's unfortunate for people, because you have to wait, 2 or 3 more years before that's going to be available.
Okay, yes. But they can find again, if they put your names into YouTube, there's tons of videos that you guys have done with much more extensive unpacking than you were able to do today. But I just want to say thank you guys so much. I look at the comments. Awesome panel. You guys were amazing. Thank you so much. I know that we sort of restricted you a little bit because we could have gone on and on, but you guys gave us a lot of info. Thank you so much. I'm just going to say a quick word of prayer, and then we're going to close. So, dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your goodness and your mercy and your love. Thank you for the opportunity to look back and to see what you've done and how you've brought us through in the past, and for the opportunities, Lord, to see what we can do presently and what we can do going forward. We ask, Lord, that you'll continue to lead us, to guide us, to be with us, help us to seek your wisdom always with regard to social justice and what needs to be done. Continue to watch over us, we pray, Lord, and come quickly, we ask. In Jesus' name, amen.